Today we're back in 15th century Spain, or at this time, Castile, to look at the story of Queen Isabella I. Her marriage united the Iberian Peninsula under Christian rule and ultimately created the unified Spain. She also made the decision to support Christopher Columbus's voyage, laying the foundation for Spain's future prosperity and, at the same time, opening the age of colonialism. Her life was not only illustrious, but also dramatic. Today we will look at the story of how her extraordinary marriage came about. Queen Isabella was born in the Kingdom of Castile during a time when Iberian Peninsula was fragmented into several smaller kingdoms. She was the daughter of King Juan II of Castile and Leon and his second wife, Isabella of Portugal. She had a much older half-brother Enrique, who was the son of Juan II from his first wife, Maria of Aragon. She also had a younger brother, Alfonso, who was 2 years younger. Her father, King Juan II, was a weak and rather ineffective ruler. His lack of leadership plunged the kingdom into chaos and caused widespread dissatisfaction among the people. Different factions of nobles, including the Infantes of Aragon, who were his first wife, Maria of Aragon's brothers, exercised control over many different regions within Castile, even contending with the king's authority. He was also easily swayed by people around him, especially by his chief minister and constable of Castile, Alvaro de Luna. Alvaro had strong control over the king. It was Alvaro who selected Isabella of Portugal as the king's second wife after Maria of Aragon died. His plan was to use Isabella and Portugal as a counterweight to influence from Aragon. But Isabella of Portugal was not a mere pawn. She quickly became a rival to Alvaro's power. Alvaro had been invaluable to Juan II, helping him control the Castilian nobles. But the king found his young, new bride Isabella enticing and started to listen to her more and more, especially after the young Isabella's birth in 1451. In 1453, Isabella of Portugal, allied with her stepson Enrique, the future King Enrique IV, persuaded the king to arrest Del Luna and have him publicly executed at Valladolid on the charge of murdering the king's accountant. And later that year, the queen gave birth to a son, Alfonso. When King Juan II fell gravely ill and passed away 7 months later, Enrique became the next king as Enrique IV. Although Isabella of Portugal was Enrique's ally when they were driving out Alvaro de Luna, a king's power is not something to be shared. Queen Isabella and the children were required to leave the palace. They were placed in the small town of Arevalo. During this period, Isabella and her younger brother Alfonso were seen as potential threats to Enrique's rule. The royal army kept a close watch over them, denying any contact with the outside world. Juan II had left the children the control of various towns and income from those, but Enrique did not follow Juan's will. They were even deprived of basic necessities, forcing the young Isabella and her brother to endure hunger and hardship. As for the Queen Mother, who once wielded great power in the royal court, the ordeal proved too much to bear. She had bouts of depression ever since Isabella's birth, in what may be considered postpartum depression in modern terms, but her mental health deteriorated significantly during this period. Watching her children starve and being stripped of her influence drove her to a mental breakdown. She lost her grip on reality to a point that, at times, she was unable to recognize anyone around her. Her daughter, young Isabella, had to witness her mother's slow descent into dementia. But when her mother, Queen Isabella, was feeling better, she would still supervise Isabella and Alfonso's education. Eventually, when Isabella was around 10 years old, Enrique allowed his half-siblings to return to court in Segovia. This was because Enrique's second wife was expecting to give birth soon. Because Isabella and Alfonso would become rivals to his soon-to-be-born child and heir, Enrique wanted to keep them close so that he can directly control their whereabouts and access. In 1462, Enrique's wife, Juana of Portugal, gave birth to a daughter, also named Juana, and Enrique named her the heir to the throne of Castile. But, to his dismay, rumors started to swirl around Juana's parentage that she is actually a daughter of a nobleman named Beltrán de la Cueva. This Beltrán de la Cueva was a nobleman Enrique had been recently favoring, and he was awarded mastership of the religious and military order called the Order of Santiago. This appointment had angered a faction of the Castilian nobility headed by Juan Pacheco, Duke of Escalona. It is unclear whether this was in fact the case, or it was a rumor fabricated by Pacheco's factions who were disgruntled by Beltrán's sudden rise. But the implication of the rumor was enormous. If this was in fact true, Juana had no right to the throne of Castile. And the problem was, in the age of no genetic testing, there was no way to prove or disprove this. The nobles nonetheless used the rumors to back Alfonso over Juana as the true heir, and Enrique had to agree to a compromise, which was to name Alfonso his heir, but on condition that Juana would be betrothed to him, so that eventually Alfonso and Juana would share the crown as the king and queen. And if you think about it, it was a quite clever compromise as long as both of them survived to adulthood and end up getting married. But it was still a humiliating outcome for the king. And it doesn't seem like the king actually believed the rumor himself. After all, Pacheco's factions had been quiet for 2 years after Juana was born, and the rumor started to circulate only after Beltrán had been awarded the mastership of the Order of Santiago. So, to the king, it must have felt like Juan Pacheco was spreading the rumor to grab power from Beltrán and using Alfonso's succession right as a front. So, in February 1465, King Enrique renounced this arrangement. Things soon devolved into civil war between the king's forces and Pacheco's factions supporting Alfonso. But after almost 3 years of civil war, an unexpected development occurred. Alfonso died suddenly at the age of 14 in July 1468, and with this, support for the rebels had begun to wane. The remaining supporters wanted to rally around Isabella, but she did not have the appetite for further civil war. Isabella had witnessed the turmoil of civil wars tearing Castile apart. She observed her nation weakening and her people suffering. Despite her own ambitions, she recognized her own limitations and began to question whether prolonging these conflicts was worth the cost. So, in September of 1468, she met with King Enrique, her half-brother, with a proposal to end the civil war. Eventually they reached an agreement. Enrique recognized Isabella as his successor, and as part of the deal, she would not have to marry against her will, which was a distinct improvement over tradition. Isabella, on her part, was not to marry anyone without Enrique's consent. Now, marriage in the 15th century was a political tool that creates alliances between kingdoms. And in this case, Enrique had an alliance with Portugal in mind. Enrique wanted Isabella to marry King Alfonso V of Portugal and have his daughter Juana marry Alfonso V's son and heir, Juan. The proposed marriage threatened Isabella's ambitions. Becoming the Queen of Portugal would tether her to another nation's interests. Chances are, any child she might have would not become the King of Portugal because of the existence of Crown Prince Juan, who will marry Juana. Isabella's children might still have a claim to the throne of Castile, but Who knows how the political climate of Castile might change while she was away in Portugal? Isabella needed an alternative. She dispatched trusted envoys across Europe in secret to evaluate potential husband materials. And one candidate stood out, and that was Ferdinand of Aragon. Ferdinand was actually not a stranger to Isabella. She had once been betrothed to him when she was still a child. That betrothal fell apart when Enrique backed out of the arrangement, but Ferdinand's father, Juan II of Aragon, who should not be confused with Isabella's father, Juan II of Castile, must have really liked Isabella. He was quite angry when Enrique backed out of her initial betrothal with Ferdinand. Or maybe he was just angry that he was losing a potential foothold into the Castilian royal family. Whichever was the case, he happily negotiated in secret with Isabella a marriage to his son Ferdinand. So throughout 1468, Isabella continued to entertain the Portuguese proposal, never quite outright rejecting the marriage to King Alfonso V. But she was secretly receiving envoys from Aragon at the same time, carefully weighing her options. By spring of 1469, she had made her choice, and it was Ferdinand. Some historians have claimed that Ferdinand's youth and his dashing reputation from the battles he fought from young age tipped the scale in his favor over the much older Alfonso V. It is more likely that Isabella was following her head rather than her heart. Being the smart and savvy politician she was growing into, Isabella must have figured out that, if she married Alfonso V, she would be forced to forfeit any power she may have had in Castile. With Ferdinand, she could craft a better deal to maintain her power, even though that meant she would be openly rebelling against her brother and breaking the terms of their agreement. But, of course, Ferdinand's youth and reputation certainly wouldn't have hurt his chances either. By this time, Enrique was growing angry with Isabella for keep refusing all the candidates that he put before her. The engagement with Ferdinand still remained in secret. But how can she actually get married? The opportunity came when King Enrique had to travel to Andalusia to deal with the rebellion. While the king was away, Isabella left Ocaña, the town where Enrique had placed her under careful watch of his spies. She pretended that she was visiting her brother Alfonso's tomb in Avia, and from Avia she went to Madrigal, and from there she requested the help from the Archbishop of Toledo, who was a key advisor and supporter of Isabella at that time, to escort her to Valladolid, where another supporter of Isabella was based. From Valladolid, she sent a message to Ferdinand to urge him to come to see her. Ferdinand immediately understood the urgency of the situation. For now, Isabella was temporarily protected by the Archbishop of Toledo, but she could be taken back into the custody under King Enrique at any time. Ferdinand had to act quickly, but to reach her, he had to cross the region controlled by the nobles hostile to Aragon. So Ferdinand disguised himself as a servant and crossed the border into Castile with only a few members of his household. The rest of his group were disguised as merchants. They did not stop often and rode on day and night. Whenever they had to stop at an inn, he had to play the part of the servant to his companions, waiting at tables and tending the mules. So this way, they actually managed to arrive at the friendly town on Isabella's side before the date they were expected. Ferdinand was apparently too excited, so he stepped forward when he saw the gates of the town and almost got himself shot by the arrows of the town's guards. But soon they figured out who Ferdinand was, and the news of his arrival was quickly sent to Isabella at Valladolid. When he finally arrived at Valladolid, he was greeted by the Archbishop of Toledo and then taken to meet Isabella. The chroniclers of the time described their meeting as a love at first sight affair. Be as that may, it was also a marriage of shared political interest. 4 days after they first met, they were officially engaged, and the next day, on October 19, 1469, they were married at the Vivero Palace in Valladolid. King Enrique was furious when he got the news of this marriage. Isabella had broken their agreement that she would not marry without his approval, but he was also secretly pleased. Now he had a good excuse to break the treaty that named Isabella his heir. So Enrique promptly removed Isabella as his heir and reinstated his daughter Juana. Isabella was not surprised, but she did not directly challenge her brother for the throne while he lived. 5 years after her wedding, on one freezing December morning in 1474, news of Enrique's death reached Isabella and Ferdinand. The following day, Isabella proclaimed herself Queen of Castile and demanded obedience from the main cities of the kingdom. Weeks later, Juana also proclaimed herself queen. By this time, Juana was betrothed to her maternal uncle and Isabella's former suitor, King Alfonso V of Portugal. Alfonso V marched into Castile and married Juana. Ferdinand's forces from Aragon fought on Isabella's side, and what followed was 4 years of war, now called the War of Castilian Succession. Isabella ultimately prevailed in this war with the help of Ferdinand's Aragonese forces. The war ended in 1479 with the Treaty of Alcáçovas, which recognized Isabella and Ferdinand as sovereigns of Castile. The war also had the unintended effect of strengthening the alliance between Castile and Aragon and Isabella and Ferdinand personally. That same year, Ferdinand's father, Juan II of Aragon, died, and Ferdinand became the King of Aragon. They would jointly rule Castile and Aragon until the death of Queen Isabella in 1504, after 35 years of marriage. Isabella and Ferdinand had many children who survived into adulthood, including a daughter named Juana, who would inherit their throne of Castile and Aragon after their death. Another daughter was Catherine of Aragon, who would later become the first queen of King Henry VIII of England and mother of Queen Mary I. In our next video, we will continue with the story of the children of Queen Isabella. So please like and subscribe to continue receiving our stories from history. Also, check out our playlist for the series on other countries and periods. It really helps a small channel like us.